Jake Morrison felt his head spinning as he slowly opened his eyes. The last thing he remembered was the bright flash of enemy fire hitting his fighter ship during the battle near the outer rim. His small craft had been spinning out of control, while alien ships surrounded the human fleet like angry wasps around a disturbed nest. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy and strange. The air around him tasted different, carrying a sweet smell that reminded him of flowers he had never seen before. As his vision cleared, Jake realized he was not on any human ship he knew. The walls around him glowed with soft blue and purple lights that moved like living things. They seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, creating patterns that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. The floor beneath him felt warm and smooth like polished stone, but it gave slightly under his weight as if it was alive. Jake stood up carefully and looked around his prison. The room was small but not cramped, with curved walls that met at the ceiling without any sharp corners. There was no door that he could see, just solid walls of the strange glowing material. He pressed his hands against the surface and felt it vibrate under his touch like the skin of some giant creature. Through the translucent walls, he could see movement outside. Tall figures walked past, their shapes blurred but clearly not human. They moved with grace that seemed almost like dancing, their forms flowing rather than walking in the jerky way humans moved. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt different in this strange place. Jake tried to remember the battle clearly. The human exploration fleet had been investigating strange signals from beyond known space when the alien ships appeared. Captain Lisa Bennett had ordered all fighters to defend the civilian ships while the main fleet tried to escape. Jake had been flying his fighter in formation with the other pilots when he saw the transport ship Pacific Dawn taking heavy fire. The big ship carried families and scientists, people who had never signed up to fight. Without thinking, Jake had broken formation and put his small fighter between the transport and the enemy guns. That decision had saved the Pacific Dawn but cost Jake his freedom. Enemy beams had disabled his ship, and some kind of invisible force had pulled him into the belly of the largest alien vessel. He remembered seeing the hull of the ship opening like a mouth to swallow his fighter before everything went dark. Now, he was here, wherever here was, in a cell that seemed grown rather than built. Jake walked to one wall and tried to find any weakness, any way to escape. The material felt solid but warm, like touching someone's skin. It was unsettling and fascinating. At the same time, suddenly, the wall in front of him began to shimmer and fade. Jake stepped back, ready to fight or run, but the opening revealed two aliens who moved toward him slowly. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that changed colors like oil on water. Their faces were almost human, but with eyes that were too large and too bright, like looking into deep pools of starlight. They wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal, flowing and changing as they moved. Neither alien spoke, but they gestured for Jake to follow them. He considered refusing, but curiosity won over caution. These beings had not hurt him so far, and staying in the cell would teach him nothing about his situation. The corridor outside, his cell, was even more amazing than his prison. The walls curved and twisted like the inside of a seashell, all covered with the same living light. Other aliens moved past them, some stopping to stare at Jake with those impossible eyes. None showed fear or anger, only curiosity, as if they were looking at a rare animal. Jake tried to memorize the path they took, but the corridors all looked the same and seemed to change when he was not looking directly at them. It was like walking through a dream where the rules of normal space did not apply. Finally, they entered a vast chamber that took Jake's breath away. The ceiling stretched so high above that it faded into darkness, and the walls curved outward, like they were inside an enormous bubble. In the center of the room stood something that could only be a throne, but it looked like it had grown from the floor, rather than been placed there. Sitting on the throne was the most beautiful and terrifying being Jake had ever seen. She was clearly female, with the same tall build and color-changing skin as the others, but there was something different about her. Power radiated from her like heat from a fire, and her eyes held intelligence that seemed ancient beyond measure. The aliens who had brought Jake stepped back and lowered their heads. The figure on the throne rose gracefully and began walking toward him. Each step she took seemed to echo through the chamber, though Jake heard no sound. As she came closer, Jake could see details that made his breath catch. Her skin was not just changing colors but showed patterns like constellations moving across a night sky. Her hair moved as if underwater, flowing around her shoulders without any wind. When she smiled, her teeth were white as pearls and sharp. As a predator's, she stopped just in front of Jake, close enough that he could smell that strange flower scent again, stronger now. Her eyes studied his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading his thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was like music played on instruments he had never heard. "Welcome, human," she said in perfect English, though Jake was certain no human had ever met her people before. "I am Queen Nalira of the Zephyrian Empire. You are far from home, brave pilot, but you are exactly where you need to be." Jake stared at Queen Nalira, his mind racing with questions. How did she know English so perfectly when no human had ever made contact with her species before? Her voice carried strange harmonics that seemed to vibrate in his chest, making him feel calm despite the impossible situation. "You speak my language," Jake said, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "How is that possible?" The queen smiled, and the expression transformed her alien features into something almost familiar. "We have been watching your species for many generations, Jake Morrison. We know much about humans, perhaps more than you know about yourselves." She gestured with one graceful hand, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly they were surrounded by floating images that moved like living memories. Jake saw scenes he recognized from human history, but they were viewed from impossible angles, as if someone had been watching from space. "Your people fascinate us," Queen Nalira continued, walking around the holographic displays. "Most species we encounter follow predictable patterns. They grow, they expand, they consume, and eventually they destroy themselves or become so focused on survival that they lose what made them special in the first place." Jake watched in amazement as the images showed human cities rising and falling, wars being fought, and peace being made. He saw moments of incredible bravery and terrible cruelty, all captured in perfect detail by observers who had remained hidden among the stars. "But humans are different," the queen said, stopping in front of an image that showed a human pulling another from a burning building. "You call it many things: courage, love, stubbornness, hope. We call it the eternal flame." "The eternal flame," Jake repeated, not sure he understood. Queen Nalira waved her hand again, and new images appeared. These showed other alien species, ones Jake did not recognize. Some looked like giant insects with multiple arms and cold, calculating eyes. Others resembled walking plants or creatures made of living metal. "These are the Corveni," she said, pointing to the insect-like beings. Once they were passionate explorers who would risk everything to discover new worlds. Now they think only of efficiency and profit. Their flame died long ago. She moved to another image showing the plant-like creatures. The Verdani were once gardeners of entire star systems, creating beauty wherever they went. Now they care only for their own survival and growth. They have forgotten why beauty matters. More images flowed past, each showing a species that had lost something essential as they grew older and more advanced. Jake began to understand what the queen meant by the eternal flame. It was the spark that made beings do impossible things, not because they had to, but because something inside them said they should. "Your people have kept this flame burning even as you developed technology that could destroy your entire world," Queen Nalira said. "You still have individuals who will sacrifice everything for strangers, who will fight against impossible odds. Who will choose hope when logic says there is no reason for it?" Jake thought about his own actions during the battle. Breaking formation to protect the Pacific Dawn had been foolish from a tactical standpoint. Any military computer would have calculated that his small fighter could not significantly help the transport ship. But he had done it anyway, because the thought of those families dying when he might have prevented it was unbearable. "You were watching the battle," he said, realizing the truth. "You saw what happened." "We have been watching your fleet since you entered this region of space," the Queen confirmed. We wanted to see how humans would react when faced with superior force. Most species either surrender immediately or fight with cold calculation. But your people fought with passion, and more importantly, you fought to protect those who could not protect themselves. The holographic images changed again, showing scenes from the recent battle. Jake saw his own fighter breaking formation, saw the Pacific Dawn limping away to safety, saw other human pilots making similar choices to protect civilian ships even when it meant certain capture or death. This is why we took you specifically, Jake Morrison, Queen Nalira said. Not because you were the best pilot or the highest ranking officer, but because in that moment when you chose to shield the transport ship, you showed us the essence of what makes humanity special. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. He had not thought of his actions as special, just necessary. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said. No, the Queen replied firmly. Most would not. That is what makes it remarkable. She moved closer to him, and Jake caught that flower scent again. Up close, he could see that her skin was not just changing colors, but was covered in tiny patterns that looked like writing in some unknown language. My people, the Zephyrians, are ancient, she continued. We have lived for thousands of years, and our technology can accomplish things your species has not yet dreamed of. But we have paid a price for our advancement. We have become careful, thoughtful, logical. We no longer take the kind of risks that lead to great discoveries or great acts of heroism. Jake looked around the incredible throne room with its impossible architecture and living walls. It was hard to imagine that the beings who built this lacked anything. We are dying, Jake, Queen Nalira said quietly. Not from disease or war, but from our own caution. We have become so afraid of making mistakes that we have stopped truly living. Our young are born already old, thinking in terms of centuries instead of moments. The weight of her words settled over Jake like a heavy blanket. He began to understand why they had taken him, why they had been watching humanity so carefully. You need us, he said. We need what you represent, the Queen corrected. The willingness to act on instinct and emotion, to take chances that logic says are foolish, to believe that individual choices can change the fate of entire worlds. She gestured again, and the holographic images disappeared, leaving them alone in the vast chamber. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the subtle sounds of the living ship around them. There is something else, Queen Nalira said, her voice softer now. Something we have never told any species we have encountered. Our galaxy faces a threat that all our technology and wisdom may not be enough to stop. We believe that humanity's unique nature might be the key to survival, not just for your species, but for all life as we know it. Jake felt the weight of her words settling into his bones. Whatever this threat was, it had an ancient and powerful alien queen looking to humanity for salvation. The responsibility was staggering, but something deep inside him, that same spark that had made him shield. The Pacific Dawn rose to meet the challenge. Queen Nalira led Jake through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked. The walls flowed like water, creating new passages while closing others behind them. Jake tried to understand how such technology was possible, but gave up when the floor itself began to move beneath his feet like a gentle river. Before we can proceed, the Queen said as they walked, I must be certain that you truly represent the qualities we have observed in humanity. Your capture was not accidental, Jake Morrison. We needed to bring one of your kind here for testing. They entered a chamber that was completely different from the organic curves of the rest of the ship. This room was stark and angular, with walls that showed complex mathematical equations floating in the air like living things. In the center stood a device that looked like a chair surrounded by crystalline structures that hummed with energy. The first test, Queen Nalira explained, will examine how you make decisions under pressure. You will experience a simulation that feels completely real, but remember that your choices here will have no actual consequences beyond this room. Jake approached the chair cautiously. The crystals around it pulsed with soft light that seemed to respond to his presence. What kind of simulation? He asked. You will command a small fleet facing impossible odds, the Queen replied. The enemy will offer you two choices. You may save a group of our civilians, or you may capture a strategic position that could help. You win the larger battle, you cannot do both. Jake settled into the chair, which adjusted itself to fit his body perfectly. The crystals began to glow brighter, and suddenly the chamber disappeared. He found himself standing on the bridge of a starship, with alien crew members who looked at him with trusting eyes. The simulation felt completely real. Jake could smell the recycled air of the ship, feel the vibration of the engines through the deck plates, hear the urgent beeping of alert signals. Through the main view screen he saw a battle raging in space around a planet covered in glittering cities. "Commander," said one of the alien crew members, "we have received two urgent signals. The civilian evacuation ships are under attack in Sector 7. They cannot defend themselves and will be destroyed within minutes. At the same time, our scouts report that the enemy command ship is vulnerable in Sector 12. If we strike now, we can cripple their fleet and end this battle." Jake looked at the tactical display. The crew member was right. He could not reach both locations in time. Saving the civilians meant letting the enemy command ship escape to fight another day. Taking out the command ship meant watching innocent families die. For a moment, Jake considered the strategic value of each choice. Destroying the enemy command ship would save more lives in the long run by ending the war quickly. It was the logical choice, the one any military computer would make without hesitation. Then he thought about the families in those evacuation ships. Parents holding children, elderly couples who had lived full lives, young people with dreams they had not yet achieved. They were not soldiers who had chosen to risk their lives. They were innocents caught in a conflict not of their making. "Set course for Sector 7, Jake ordered. "Maximum speed." "Sir," the tactical officer protested, "the enemy command ship will escape. We may never get another chance like this." "The civilians are our priority," Jake said firmly. "We protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is what separates us from our enemies." The simulation dissolved around him, and Jake found himself back in the crystal chamber. Queen Nalira was watching him with an expression he could not read. "Interesting," she said. "Most of our own commanders would have chosen the strategic target. The lives of many outweigh the lives of few, they would say." "Maybe," Jake replied, "but if we start deciding that some people matter less than others, we become the kind of beings we are fighting against." The Queen nodded slowly. "The second test will challenge your mind rather than your heart." The crystals shifted their configuration, and the air around Jake filled with floating symbols and equations. They looked like mathematics, but unlike any system he had ever seen. The symbols moved and changed, forming patterns that seemed to dance just beyond his understanding. "This puzzle has challenged our greatest scholars for centuries," Queen Nalira explained. "It requires both logical analysis and intuitive leaps. Our people have approached it with pure mathematics and systematic methodology, but perhaps a different perspective is needed." Jake studied the floating symbols. They reminded him of music notation, but also of star charts and molecular diagrams. He tried applying human mathematical concepts, but the alien system operated on different principles entirely. Then he stopped trying to force human logic onto the problem and instead let his mind relax. He began to see patterns that were not mathematical but emotional. The symbols seemed to tell a story, not of numbers and equations, but of growth and change and connection. Jake reached out and began moving the symbols, not based on calculation, but on instinct. He arranged them in patterns that felt right, that seemed to flow naturally from one to another. As he worked, the symbols began to glow brighter, responding to his touch. Suddenly, the entire display flashed with brilliant light, and all the symbols settled into a perfect, harmonious pattern. The equations balanced themselves, and a soft chime filled the chamber. Queen Nalira stared at the completed puzzle with amazement. "Remarkable," she breathed. "You solved in minutes what our scholars have struggled with for generations. How did you do it?" "I stopped trying to think like a computer," Jake said. "I started thinking like a human." The puzzle was not about mathematics. It was about understanding the story the symbols were trying to tell. And that brings us to the final test, the Queen said, her voice becoming more serious. This one will be the most difficult, for it requires us to share something that my people guard carefully. The crystals around the chair began to pulse in unison, creating a rhythm like a giant heartbeat. Queen Nalira moved closer, her hand hovering over a control surface that appeared in the air at her touch. I'm going to share my memories with you, she said, and in return I will experience yours. This technology allows complete mental connection between two beings, but it is dangerous. You will feel everything I have felt, see through my eyes, experience the weight of ruling an empire that spans star systems. Jake hesitated for only a moment. What will you see from me? Everything that makes you human, she replied. Your joys and sorrows, your fears and hopes, your connections to others of your kind, are you willing? Jake thought about the magnitude of what she was offering. To truly understand an alien mind, to see the universe through eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. It was an opportunity no human had ever been given. I am willing, he said. Queen Nalira placed her hand on another crystal, and suddenly Jake's mind was flooded with memories that were not his own. He experienced centuries of life, the crushing loneliness of immortal rulership, the weight of decisions that affected billions of lives. He felt the gradual loss of wonder as the universe became predictable, the slow extinction of hope as one disappointment followed another, but at the same time, the Queen was experiencing his memories. She felt the simple joy of a sunset on Earth, the warmth of friendship and family, the fierce determination to protect others even when victory seemed impossible. She experienced the wild optimism of youth and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that characterized his species. When the connection ended, both of them sat in stunned silence. Jake felt tears on his cheeks, overwhelmed by the ancient sadness he had experienced in her memories. Queen Nalira was staring at him with an expression of wonder and something else he could not identify. Now I understand, she whispered. Now, I truly understand what we have lost and what you still possess. The mental connection had changed everything between Jake and Queen Nalira. As they sat in the crystal chamber, both still recovering from the intensity of shared memories, Jake could see that she was struggling with emotions she had not felt in centuries. Her composed royal mask had slipped, revealing the isolated being beneath. The tests are complete, she said finally, her voice softer than before. You have proven what I hoped to find, but now comes the most difficult part. I must make a decision that will affect both our species for generations to come. She stood and gestured for Jake to follow her. They left the testing chamber and walked through corridors that seemed to respond to the Queen's emotional state. The walls pulsed with deeper colors now, and the air itself felt charged with tension. They entered a new room that Jake realized must be some kind of command center. Dozens of Zephyrians worked at stations that looked grown rather than built, their hands dancing over controls that appeared and disappeared as needed. Holographic displays showed star maps spanning entire galaxy sectors with moving points that Jake assumed represented ships and fleets. Behold the true scope of our empire, Queen Nalira said, gesturing to the displays. We control thousands of star systems, protect billions of lives, and possess technology that can reshape matter at the atomic level. By any measure, we are one of the most successful civilizations in galactic history. Jake studied the displays with growing amazement. The Zephyrian Empire was vast beyond anything humans had imagined possible. Their ships moved between stars as easily as human aircraft flew between cities. But all of this may not be enough, the Queen continued, her voice becoming grim. Show him, she commanded one of the technicians. The central display changed, zooming out to show a view of the entire galaxy. At first, Jake saw only the normal spiral pattern of stars and nebulae. Then he noticed areas of absolute darkness, voids where no stars shone at all. The Void Collective, Queen Nalira said. An ancient machine intelligence that consumes entire star systems. It breaks down matter and energy to create more of itself, leaving nothing but empty space behind. It has been growing for millions. of years, and now it threatens to devour everything. Jake watched in horror as the display showed the progression of the dark areas over time. The Void Collective was spreading like a cancer, consuming star systems faster than new ones could form. "We have been fighting this enemy for thousands of years," the Queen explained. "Our most advanced weapons barely slow it down. Our greatest strategic minds cannot predict its movements because it adapts faster than we can develop new tactics. Every battle we win teaches it how to fight us better." "How long before it reaches human space?" Jake asked, though he dreaded the answer. "At its current rate of expansion, perhaps 500 years, she replied. "But that assumes it does not discover your location and prioritize your destruction. The collective seems drawn to species with strong life force. Your people's intensity might attract its attention much sooner." Jake felt the weight of this revelation settling on him like a physical burden. Humanity had been exploring space for such a short time, had achieved so little compared to ancient civilizations like the Zephyrians. How could they possibly help against a threat that had stymied the most advanced species in the galaxy? "You think humans can help somehow," he said. Queen Nalira moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her alien skin. "The Void Collective operates on pure logic and efficiency. It studies every tactic we use and develops countermeasures. But logic and efficiency are not human strengths." She activated another display that showed recordings of the recent battle between human and Zephyrian fleets. Jake watched himself breaking formation to protect the civilian transport, saw other human pilots making similarly illogical but heroic choices. "Your people fight with passion and unpredictability," the Queen continued. "You make decisions based on emotion and instinct that no logical analysis could anticipate. This chaos, this beautiful madness, might be exactly what we need to confuse and defeat an enemy that thinks it can predict everything." Jake began to understand the true scope of what she was proposing. "You want to ally with humanity. Give us your technology and knowledge so we can fight alongside you?" "More than that," she said. "I want to accelerate your development by thousands of years, make your species one of the most advanced in the galaxy almost overnight. But the risks are enormous." She called up new displays showing human history, focusing on wars and conflicts. "Your people have a tendency toward violence and competition. Given Zephyrian technology, you could become a threat to every other species in the galaxy. Some of my advisors believe humanity should be contained or eliminated before you become too dangerous." Jake felt a chill at the casual way she mentioned eliminating humanity. "And what do you believe?" "I believe that the same passion that drives you to war also drives you to protect the innocent, to sacrifice for others, to attempt the impossible when everything logical says to give up," she replied. "I have seen it in your memories, felt it in your mind, but I am only one voice among many." As if summoned by her words, several other Zephyrians entered the command center. These were clearly important figures, dressed in more elaborate robes and carrying themselves with the bearing of high officials. Jake noticed that they kept their distance from him, studying him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. "My council has been debating humanity's fate since you were brought aboard," Queen Nalira explained quietly. "Some see the potential I see. Others view your species as too dangerous to be trusted with advanced technology." One of the council members, an elderly Zephyrian with skin that flickered between silver and deep blue, approached them. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying harmonics of disapproval. "The human has passed your tests, but tests conducted in isolation cannot predict how his entire species will behave when given power beyond their current understanding. Counselor." "Vex speaks truth," added another council member, this one female with skin that remained a steady gold color. "The human shows admirable qualities as an individual, but his people are young and untested. They might use our gifts to conquer rather than protect." Jake realized that his personal fate was tied to the future of his entire species. Everything he said and did here would influence whether humanity received the help they needed to survive. or face destruction at the hands of their potential allies. Queen Nalira looked at Jake with an expression that seemed to be asking for his help in convincing her council. "Perhaps," she said, "we should allow the human to speak for his people. Jake Morrison, if your species received our technology and knowledge, what would you do with it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake knew that his answer might determine whether humanity lived or died, whether Earth became a partner in defending the galaxy or another dark void consumed by an ancient enemy. He thought about everything he had learned, about the Void Collective and the scope of the threat it represented. He thought about humanity's history of both conflict and cooperation, about their capacity for both destruction and heroism. "My people are not perfect," Jake said finally, addressing both the Queen and her council. "We fight among ourselves, we make mistakes, we sometimes choose badly. But when faced with a threat to innocent life, when confronted with something that wants to destroy everything we care about, we come together. We become more than the sum of our parts." He gestured to the displays showing the advancing darkness of the Void Collective. "You are offering us a chance to grow up fast, to become the partners you need us to be. It is a risk, but the alternative is watching everything die slowly. I would rather take the chance on hope than accept the certainty of despair." The council chamber fell silent after Jake's words. The Zephyrian advisors exchanged glances that spoke volumes in their alien language of subtle color changes and barely perceptible gestures. Queen Nalira stood perfectly still, her own skin showing patterns that Jake had learned to recognize as deep thought and internal conflict. "Counselor." Vex was the first to break the silence. "The human speaks well," he admitted, his silver-blue skin flickering with what Jake hoped was approval. "But words are easily spoken. How do we know his species will honor such noble intentions when given power that could reshape entire worlds?" "Because," Queen Nalira said quietly, "I have seen into his mind and felt the truth of what drives his people. The connection we shared showed me something I had not experienced in centuries. Hope that burns bright enough to push back any darkness." She moved away from the council members and approached Jake. As she drew near, he could see that her composure was beginning to crack. The weight of the decision she faced was enormous, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked uncertain. "My advisors raise valid concerns," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your species is young and untested. The technology we could share with you would make you incredibly powerful very quickly. There is no guarantee that humanity would use such gifts wisely." Jake felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Everything depended on what happened next, not just his own fate, but the future of both their species. "Your Majesty," he said formally, then paused and spoke more personally. "Nalira, I cannot promise that every human will make perfect choices. But I can promise that we will try to be worthy of your trust." The use of her name, without her royal title, seemed to surprise the council members, but Queen Nalira's expression softened. In that moment, Jake saw past the alien features and ancient wisdom to the lonely being beneath. Someone who had carried the burden of impossible decisions for far too long? "The choice is mine to make," she announced to her council, her voice gaining strength. "As Queen of the Zephyrian Empire, I have the authority to forge alliances as I see fit. I have decided to offer humanity our partnership." Counselor Vex stepped forward, his skin now showing bands of red that Jake interpreted as alarm. "Your Majesty, such a momentous decision should not be made in haste. Perhaps we should observe the humans longer, study their behavior under different conditions." "We do not have time for extended observation," the Queen replied firmly. "The Void Collective grows stronger every day we delay. If we wait until we are completely certain of humanity's worthiness, we may find that the opportunity for alliance has passed along with everything else worth protecting." She turned back to Jake, and he saw something in her eyes that went beyond political calculation or military strategy. The mental connection they had shared had created a bond that transcended species barriers, and both of them felt it. "There is another factor in my decision," she said, speaking to him alone despite the presence of her advisors. In all my centuries of life, I have never encountered another being who understood the true weight of leadership, the price of making choices that affect countless lives. You carry that burden as naturally as you breathe, and it calls to something deep within me. Jake felt his heart racing as he realized the full implications of what she was saying. The attraction he had been trying to ignore, the connection that had formed between them during their mental sharing, was not one-sided. "Your Majesty," the golden-skinned counselor said with obvious concern, "surely you are not allowing personal feelings to influence such an important decision." Queen Nalira turned to face her entire council, and when she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had ruled an empire for longer than human civilization had existed. "My feelings, as you call them, are exactly what give me the insight to make this decision correctly. For too long, we Zephyrians have made choices based purely on logic and careful analysis. That approach has brought us to the edge of extinction." She gestured toward the displays still showing the advancing darkness of the Void Collective. "Our careful, logical strategies have failed against this enemy. Perhaps it is time to trust in something less predictable, something that burns with the kind of passion we lost long ago." The council members looked uncertain, but none of them dared to directly challenge their queen's authority. They began filing out of the command center, leaving Jake and Nalira alone with their momentous decision. As the last advisor left the room, Queen Nalira seemed to deflate slightly, the enormous confidence she had projected for her council's benefit, giving way to the vulnerability Jake had glimpsed during their mental connection. "I hope I have chosen correctly," she said, moving to stand before the displays showing her vast empire. "The fate of billions rests on my faith in your people's better nature." Jake joined her in looking out at the star charts, but found himself more interested in studying her profile. The weight of responsibility she carried was visible in every line of her posture, and he felt a sudden urge to offer comfort to someone who had been strong for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be supported by another. "You have not just chosen for your people," he said quietly. "You have chosen for us as well. Both our species will live or die together now." She turned to look at him, and in that moment the formal distance between queen and prisoner, between ancient ruler and young pilot, seemed to dissolve. They were simply two beings who had found in each other something they had not known they were missing. "There is something I must tell you," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "The mental connection we shared, it has created a bond that goes beyond mere understanding. In my people's culture, such a connection is considered sacred, reserved for those who are meant to share their lives completely." Jake felt his breath catch. "What are you saying?" Instead of answering with words, Queen Nalira stepped closer to him. Her alien features no longer seemed strange, but beautiful in their difference. When she reached out to touch his face, her skin was warm and incredibly soft,